This video will introduce some important concepts in peace and conflict studies and also the ethics of peace. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant is well known for his absolutist perspective on ethics, the idea that there are absolute rights and wrongs. And in 1795, he wrote an essay, Perpetual Peace, a philosophic sketch, in which he argued that it is possible to have a stable, perpetual peace if nations would follow ethical rules. Immanuel Kant insisted that morality must be the guide for nations' foreign policy, and he envisioned that the world could slowly progress toward independent nations being at peace with one another perpetually, forever, with a stable peace. That is, if morality, right and wrong, principles of ethics, would guide foreign policy. The number one concept from Immanuel Kant is called a categorical imperative. That word imperative means something that you must do, that you have, in a certain situation, that ethical standards say that you must do this. The word categorical means that it applies in all cases, that it always is true. So this is the idea of an absolute moral idea. A right, what is right and what is wrong is not relative. It doesn't depend upon the situation. So Immanuel Kant was really the main philosopher who gives us the idea of an absolute moral right. A philosopher very much known for his ethics of peace was British philosopher Bertrand Russell, who was also a logician, an essayist, and a social critic. He made significant contributions to ethics, politics, educational theory, the history of ideas, and religious studies. Bertrand Russell was noted for his spirited anti-nuclear protests and his campaign against the Vietnam War. He remained a prominent public figure until his death at age 97. He was awarded the Order of Merit in 1949 and the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1950. One of his famous quotes, "War does not determine who is right, only who is left." That's Bertrand Russell. Another famous quote from philosopher Bertrand Russell, "Either man will abolish war or war will abolish man." Russell was a big believer in peace and that it was possible for us to have peace. He said, "There lies before us continual progress in happiness, knowledge, and wisdom. Shall we instead choose death because we cannot forget our quarrels? I appeal as a human being to human beings. Remember your humanity and forget the rest." One of Bertrand Russell's most famous essays is called "Why Men Fight," in which he writes about his ideas about how to get rid of war, how to end war. This book was written in 1917, so it's been around long enough now that it is in the public domain, and it is free for you to look at. You can find it at Wikisource. As he said, the supreme principle in politics and in private life should be to promote all that is creative and diminish the impulses and desires that center around possessions. So this is his concept of how we can have peace. Bertrand Russell. Pacifism is the belief that violence, including war, is unjustifiable and must be settled by peaceful means. In fact, the United Nations has been keeping track of conflicts around the world and found that nonviolent approaches have resolved conflicts 3 times more often than violence has, and that, of course, you don't have all the casualties and suffering with non-violent methods. Elie Wiesel was a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1986. He had been a Holocaust survivor. He was a prisoner in concentration camps, and here I have placed a circle showing him in a concentration camp, and he survived, and he became a peace activist, and he was a professor, a political activist, and an author. Of course, one of the people best known for a nonviolent approach to resolving conflict was Mahatma Gandhi. And he introduced this term, Satyagraha, Satyagraha, which means holding on to the truth. And this term, Satyagraha, has now been adopted by protest groups in many countries. Another term that was used by Gandhi and others, and in fact is a cardinal virtue in many religions, is ahimsa, ahimsa, which means to not injure and to have compassion, and this is meant to apply to all living things. One of the 20th century's leading peace activists was French author Albert Camus. Camus was the winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature and declared for a kind of peaceful socialism that would not resort to violence. A woman named Mildred Norman was not especially famous, is not very well known today, but a very interesting story. A woman who was so obsessed with peace, with world peace, that she spent 28 years of her life walking across the United States on foot. She did it 7 times with only the clothes on her back, spreading the message of peace and getting help from people. There's of course, that famous movie Forrest Gump, in which Forrest Gump walks and walks and walks. I wonder if the writers of Forrest Gump got that idea from the story of Mildred Norman. Anyway, she became known as the Peace Pilgrim, a very interesting character, a very interesting woman who shows this huge amount of devotion to peace, to world peace. The founder of Peace and Conflict Studies is a Norwegian sociologist named Johann Galton. He also established, along with others, the Peace Research Institute Oslo, which is the most prominent and first peace research center. And he also founded the Journal of Peace Research, which is the preeminent journal in peace studies. Johann Galtung has been contributing many ideas for peace in the world for many years, and is probably the father of peace studies. Another important peace activist and writer, academic contributor was Kenneth Bolding, born in England but lived in the United States. He was an economist, first of all, but he was an educator and a philosopher. He published over 36 books and 112 articles. He introduced the idea of stable peace, a situation so that the probability of war is so small it doesn't enter any calculations. And so he had this idea that it's possible, I guess very similar to Immanuel Kant, this idea that you can have a perpetual peace. The mother of peace studies is Elise Bolding, who was born in Norway, but when just a child, her family moved to the United States, where she got a PhD in sociology and then got interested in studying peace. She married Kenneth Bolding and took his last name. She worked at Dartmouth College and was the chair of the sociology department and started the first peace studies program at Dartmouth. She had many, many accomplishments, and she's influenced the academic study of peace, is probably one of the most influential peace researchers and activists of the 20th century, was even nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. One of the concepts that is used today in dealing with conflict is called realistic empathy. Empathy, of course, means to be able to put yourself in a place of other people. The idea of realistic empathy is that we take into account all of the factors that we need to understand another person's point of view regarding war. This concept, realistic empathy, was first produced in 1986 by Ralph K. White, a man who was born in 1907, so he was nearly 80 years old when he published this important book called Psychology and the Prevention of Nuclear War. And in this book, he introduced the concept of realistic empathy, the idea that we might not like our enemy, we might not sympathize with them, but we should be able to understand their perspective. And if we can understand the perspective, the realistic perspective of the enemy, we can maybe reach some negotiations to settle war and to prevent nuclear war from occurring. Wolfgang Dietrich has argued that peace has different meanings. And in fact, if you travel around the world, different cultures, you find that the word peace, of course, is different in different societies and that it has different meanings. And so a book was published by Palgrave Publishers, and it is called the Palgrave International Handbook of Peace Studies, which includes these different meanings of peace in different languages that comes from the research of Wolfgang Dietrich. Another book by Wolfgang Dietrich, Interpretations of Peace in History and Culture, also maps out these different ideas of what peace means, what the concept of peace means in different cultures and in different languages. And in this book, Dietrich lists 5 different types of peace, or families, he calls them families of peace, each one having a key value. So here you will see the 5 names that Dietrich uses: energetic, moral, modern, postmodern, and transrational. And then the values that are associated with each of these 5 different types of peace, these peace families. So when we think of the word peace, it can mean, at least from Dietrich's point of view, any of these 5 different areas. Here's an interesting idea. When people think of peace, they almost always think of the absence of something. They think of it in a negative way, like something's missing. So peace means that we don't have war, or we don't have conflict, or we don't have violence. Many years ago, the father of peace studies, Johann Galton, came up with this idea to call that concept negative peace, and then to use the term positive peace for the more important concept of building attitudes, structures, social ideas, social cultural institutions that will help us to create peace and keep peace within a society or a culture. So many peace researchers today use these concepts of positive peace and negative peace that I'm going to show you in the next several slides. Even before Johann Galton, the father of peace studies, came up with the idea of negative peace and positive peace, there were other leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. in the peace movement who had the same kind of concept of positive peace, that we need to think about not just the absence of war, hostility, and so on, but to think about how to build and maintain and sustain peace. Martin Luther King said, true peace is not merely the absence, it is the presence of a positive force. Commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You'll make a greater person of yourself, a greater nation, and a finer world to live in. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Well, nonviolence is not just an abstract concept or an ethical idea. It is being done in practice, and the idea of positive peace is being promoted by the United Nations, for example, which has peacekeeping forces stationed in countries with conflicts. And these peacekeeping forces protect civilians and they promote cooperations and so on. And also the Peace Corps. And Martin Luther King said nonviolence is a powerful and just weapon. All the studies show that nonviolent approaches have been much more successful than violent approaches at solving conflicts and settling disputes. Of course, when we are talking about our modern day heroes in the peace movement, we have to mention Malala, who is always just known by her first name, her name Malala Yousafzai, and she's from Pakistan. She's the youngest person to win the Nobel Prize. She won in 2014, the Peace Prize. And she's known for not only human rights advocacy, but especially for the education of women and children in Pakistan, where that had been banned by the Taliban. And she is a very brave and courageous woman who we look up to today, Malala. Malala was shot in the head by the Taliban in an attempted assassination in 2012. Luckily, she survived, and she's become a very prominent advocate for the right to education, especially for girls and women. And this has grown into an international movement that's a very proud and brave movement. Another one of our modern day heroes in the peace movement is Laima Gabowi. Laima Gabowi. She is from a country called Liberia, a small country on the west coast of Africa. Look at the map here. I show you where Liberia is located. Laima Gabowi, very important woman there, leader of the women's nonviolent peace movement known as Women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace. And she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011, and it was her efforts that led to the end of the second civil war in Liberia in 2003. So she is, of course, another one of our heroes in the peace movement. Well, we've come to the end of this video, but what about you? Has it sparked your interest in peace studies or becoming a peace activist? I hope so. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to my channel and watch some of my other videos. Bye.